So, let me check something. Okay, good. So, one of the aspects of the Think for Yourself series was supposed to be about um, whether or not, you're aware of the fact that um, you are being manipulated, basically, by the system. And there are certain psychological truths that come about as far as that apply to everybody, that apply to all humans, I guess would be the way to put it. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this stream, provided that I do it correctly. So anyway, we're going to watch this video called Mass Psychosis, and I'm going to pause it periodically and, talk about my thoughts about how this applies to things going on today. Again, I have no idea if I'm doing this right. This is the first time I've ever done it. We will see what comes of it. So, let's get started.
This after-school presentation was written and narrated by Academy of Ideas. Check out their YouTube channel for more of their videos. The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduce them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. According to the psychologist Carl Jung, the greatest threat to civilization lies not with the forces of nature, nor with any physical disease, but with our inability to deal with the forces of our own psyche. We are our own worst enemies, or as the Latin proverb puts it, man is a wolf to man. In Civilization in Transition, Jung states that this proverb is a sad yet eternal truism, and our wolf-like tendencies come most prominently into play at those times of history when mental illness becomes the norm rather than the exception in a society, a situation which Jung termed a psychic epidemic. Indeed, it is becoming ever more obvious, he writes, that it is not famine, not earthquakes, not microbes, not cancer, but man himself, who is man's greatest danger to man, for the simple reason that there is no adequate protection against psychic epidemics, which are infinitely more devastating than the worst of natural catastrophes.
Now, you guys may remember that I've mentioned a couple times different articles on Psychology Today and such that are pointing out that mental illness is becoming more and more prevalent all the time. And this is an excellent example of it. These kids are getting to colleges, and they're finding that the kids have more mental illness, not less, which means that they're in a perfect situation where anybody who wants to apply these principles of mass psychosis can set about doing so. Let's continue.
In this video, we are going to explore the most dangerous of all psychic epidemics, the mass psychosis. A mass psychosis is an epidemic of madness, and it occurs when a large portion of a society loses touch with reality and descends into delusions. Such a phenomenon is not a thing of fiction. Two examples of mass psychoses are the American and European witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries, and the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. During the witch hunts, thousands of individuals, mostly women, were killed, not for any crimes they committed, but because they became the scapegoats of societies gone mad. In some Swiss villages, writes Francis Hill, there were scarcely any women left alive after the frenzy had finally burned itself out. When a mass psychosis occurs, the results are devastating. Jung studied this phenomenon and wrote that the individuals who make up the infected society become morally and spiritually inferior. They sink unconsciously to an inferior intellectual level. They become more unreasonable, irresponsible, emotional, erratic, and unreliable, and worst of all, crimes the individual alone could never stand are freely committed by the group smitten by madness.
So I've used this allegory of the witch hunts and the Inquisition many times, and this is why. It's because this is exactly right. This is how it happens. And you find an other, you find an enemy, Well, who's the enemy? It depends on what, in what group you're in. But in this instance, we're talking about, I don't know, straight, white, male, heterosexual people are the enemies of the left. That's the assigned group of the left right now. And the right has their own. It's not unique just to the left. But when it comes to situations like this, I'd say that it's really much more dependent on insanity to get people to agree to things like white babies and only white babies are born racist, which is what they want you to believe. So let's continue.
What makes matters worse is that those suffering from a mass psychosis are unaware of what is occurring. For just as an individual gone mad cannot step out of his mind to observe the errors in his ways, so too there is no Archimedean point from which those living through a mass psychosis can observe their collective madness. But what causes a mass psychosis? To answer this question, we must first explore what drives an individual mad. While there are many potential triggers of madness, such as an excessive use of drugs or alcohol, brain injuries, and other illnesses, these physical causes will not concern us here. Our concern is with psychological, or what are called psychogenic triggers, as these are the most common culprits of the mass psychosis. The most prevalent psychogenic cause of a psychosis is a flood of negative emotions, such as fear or anxiety, that drives an individual into a state of panic. When in a state of panic, an individual will naturally seek relief, as it is too mentally and physically draining to subsist in this hyper-emotional state. While escaping from the state of panic can be accomplished through adaptive means, such as facing up to and defeating the fear-generating threat, another way to escape is to undergo a psychotic break. A psychotic break is not a descent into a state of greater disorder, as many believe, but a reordering of one's experiential world, which blends fact and fiction, or delusions and reality, in a way that helps end the feelings of panic. Silvano Arietti, one of the 20th century's foremost authorities on schizophrenia, explains the psychogenic steps that lead to madness. Firstly, there is the phase of panic, when the patient starts to perceive things in a different way, is frightened on account of it, appears confused, and does not know how to explain the strange things that are happening. The next step is what
So this example here is basically an allegory on how the witch hunts happened. And, it is that they're looking for an explanation for what's wrong with them. And then they find one. In this case, it's the witch. But we have people right now that are caught up in the delusions of the far woke that allow them to just try to see the enemy everywhere. The enemy is racism, white supremacy, sexism, and just like the inquisitors or the witch hunters, if they can't find any evidence of it, then they'll go find it. They'll manufacture it even if they have to. And I'm going to be doing videos about that in the future. So let's continue.
Arietti calls a phase of psychotic insight, whereby an individual succeeds in putting things together by devising a pathological way of seeing reality which allows him to explain his abnormal experiences. Critical
race theory, anti-racism, gender studies, this way of reasoning, the cause of their anxiety. And it's all because of evil white people, evil straight people, evil cis people, etc., etc.
The phenomenon is called insight because the patient finally sees meaning and relations in his experiences. But the insight is psychotic because it is based on delusions, not on adaptive and life-promoting ways of relating to whatever threats precipitated the panic. The delusions, in other words, allow the panic-stricken individual to escape from the flood of negative emotions, but at the cost of losing touch with reality, and for this reason, Arietti says that a psychotic break can be viewed as an abnormal way of dealing with an extreme state of anxiety. If a panic-triggering flood of negative emotions in a weak and vulnerable individual can trigger a psychotic break, then a mass psychosis can result when a population of weak and vulnerable individuals is driven into a state of panic by threats real, imagined, or fabricated.
So we talk about the weakness I was discussing earlier, that these kids are getting to college campuses, and they have no resilience. They have no ability to deal with any kind of adversity. And anxiety is the new thing that everybody has. Everybody says they have anxiety. I mean, not everybody, but you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of these people that say that they have anxiety, and they're just looking around endlessly through, what's the source of it? I got to find something to fight. It'll make me feel better if I can, find some scapegoat. That's why they use the example of the witches as scapegoats. Is you're looking for something to be the source of your anxiety, and everything would be just better. Would be just fine if you could just get rid of that. So we got to tear down, straight white males. Those are your imagined enemy. And it's once again, the conservatives are not, incapable of doing this. It'll be the evil communist threat, et cetera, et cetera. Or the terrorists. That's actually another excellent example. During 9/11, during 9/11, everybody was terrified. So, what everybody's like, well, what's the solution? What's the solution? Well, of course, the solution would be to invade Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11. But we were able to convince people, well, that's what the solution is, because everybody was terrified because of 9/11. So, but also, like, when they talk about, like, a society of weak people, why is there an effort going on to try to weaken people? Where does that come from? And it comes from, essentially a manufactured situation. You see all these people with their cell phones in their hands, and again, if you've listened to my previous videos where we talk about the creepy line, and there's actually a few different documentaries about how social media just seems to be designed to create a situation that keeps us on our phones. Well, what keeps us on our phones? But shit that pisses you off or stuff that reinforces your already existing beliefs. And if you can do that at the same time, which would be stuff that's going to piss you off while reinforcing your beliefs that there's an enemy, then they get double duty on that. So again, it becomes easier to try to manipulate masses of people. If you've created a circumstance, of mass psychosis, you can get them to believe anything.
But as delusions can take many forms, and as madness can manifest in countless ways, the specific manner in which a mass psychosis unfolds will differ based on the historical and cultural context of the infected society. But in the modern era, it is the mass psychosis of totalitarianism that appears to be the greatest threat. Totalitarianism, writes Arthur Versluis, is the modern phenomenon of total centralized state power, coupled with the obliteration of individual human rights. In the totalized state, there are those in power, and there are the objectified masses, the victims.
Now, I'm sure a lot of my colleagues on the left would say that this doesn't apply to them. However, when you start to think to yourself, well, wouldn't it be better if we could censor people who we don't agree with? That's giving up your basic rights. And it's to do it supposedly to protect you. What are you being protected from? Well, that would be people with, evil ideologies. What are evil ideologies? Well, whatever it is that doesn't agree with you. And the funny thing is that advocating for censorship or advocating for to take away the rights to peacefully assemble of any group that doesn't agree with you is heading in the direction of totalitarianism. And the problem is that the left is being told that that sort of thing only comes from the right. So they think they're perfectly safe as long as they're maintaining their leftist ideologies, that they can't possibly, fall prey to totalitarian and authoritarian societies. And critical theory actually claims that, such things only come from the right. And unfortunately, authoritarian communism is a very left thing, and it very much happens. But if you've been told that, well, don't worry, as long as you're on the left, that can't happen to you, you can ask people who lived in Maoist China or Russia about that.
In a totalitarian society, the population is divided into two groups, the rulers and the ruled, and both groups undergo a pathological transformation. The rulers are elevated to an almost godlike status, which is diametrically opposed to our nature as imperfect beings who are easily corrupted by power. The masses, on the other hand, are transformed into the dependent subjects of these pathological rulers and take on a psychologically regressed and childlike status. Hannah Arendt, one of the 20th century's preeminent scholars of this form of rule, called totalitarianism an attempted transformation of human nature itself. But this attempted transformation only turns sound minds into sick minds. For as the Dutch medical doctor who studied the mental effects of living under totalitarianism wrote, There is in fact much that is comparable between the strange reactions of the citizens of totalitarianism and their culture as a whole, on the one hand, and the reactions of the sick schizophrenic on the other. The social transformation that unfolds under totalitarianism is built upon and sustained by delusions. For only deluded men and women regress to the childlike status of obedient and submissive subjects, and hand over complete control of their lives to politicians and bureaucrats. Only a deluded ruling class will believe that they possess the knowledge, wisdom, and acumen to completely control society in a top-down manner. And only when under the spell of delusions would anyone believe that a society composed of power-hungry rulers on the one hand, and a psychologically regressed population on the other, will lead to anything other than mass suffering and social ruin.
Now, I would imagine that a lot of people on the left don't see this as ever being something possible for themselves. They're like, well, I'm not looking to be ruled by some totalitarian. But the more that you're being conditioned to become comfortable with the idea that people should not be allowed to freely express themselves, that's just one layer of trying to make you comfortable with this sort of rule. And as it is right now, you may not think that it is, but it doesn't always have to be reinforced by the state. It can be reinforced by the society. And that's how you have these people living in woke situations, where they're completely controlled. People are terrified walking around not to say the wrong thing, not to tweet the wrong tweet, not to say the wrong thing on Facebook, and if you happen to be in those groups, people who come out of them, like the cults of the woke, will tell you that that's what it was like, is that they lived every day trying to find somebody to burn as a witch to prove their virtue, while at the same time simultaneously, being terrified that they're going to say the wrong thing and become targeted next. And people who come out of that circumstance usually talk about how they were targeted, is often what ends up being the thing that wakes them up. It's not until they're coming after you that you figure out that, man, this isn't for me. This was bad. They didn't think about it when they were helping to burn other witches. It's only when they're the witch that they really understand what's wrong.
But what triggers the psychosis of totalitarianism? As was explored in the previous video of this series, the mass psychosis of totalitarianism begins in a society's ruling class. The individuals that make up this class, be it politicians, bureaucrats, or crony capitalists, are very prone to delusions that augment their power, and no delusion is more attractive to the power-hungry than the delusion that they can and should control and dominate a society. When a ruling elite becomes possessed by a political ideology of this sort, be it communism, fascism, or technocracy, the next step is to induce a population into accepting their rule by infecting them with the mass psychosis of totalitarianism. This psychosis has been induced many times throughout history, and as Mirlu explains, it is simply a question of reorganizing and manipulating collective feelings in the proper way. The general method by which the members of a ruling elite can accomplish this end is called menticide, with the etymology of this word being a killing of the mind, and as Mirlu further explains, menticide is an old crime against the human mind and spirit, but systematized anew. It is an organized system of psychological intervention and judicial perversion through which a ruling class can imprint their own opportunistic thoughts upon the minds of those they plan to use and destroy. Priming a population for the crime of menticide begins with the sowing of fear. When an individual is flooded with negative emotions, such as fear or anxiety, he or she is very susceptible to a descent into the delusions of madness. Threats, real, imagined, or fabricated, can be used to sow fear, but a particularly effective technique is to use waves of terror. Under this technique, the sowing of fear is staggered with periods of calm, but each of these periods of calm is followed by the manufacturing of an even more intense spell of fear, and on the process goes. Or as Mirlu writes, each wave of terrorizing creates its effects more easily after a breathing spell than the one that preceded it, because people are still disturbed by their previous experience. Morality becomes lower and lower, and the psychological effects of each new propaganda campaign become stronger. It reaches a public already softened up. While fear primes a population for menticide, the use of propaganda to spread misinformation and to promote confusion with respect to the source of the threats and the nature of the crisis helps to break down the minds of the masses. Government officials and their lackeys in the media can use contradictory reports, nonsensical information, and even blatant lies. As the more they confuse, the less capable will a population be to cope with the crisis and diminish their fear in a rational and adaptive manner. Confusion, in other words, heightens the susceptibility of a descent into the delusions of totalitarianism.
One of the things that Yuri Bezmenov talks about in regards to ideological subversion is that the Soviet Union used strategies to make it so that a society breaks down in this way, and then they can't come to any kind of rational decisions about anything, and that even being exposed to the truth about things does not fix this. If somebody's caught up in this, they're completely incapable of thinking.
Or as Mirlu explains, logic can be met with logic, while illogic cannot. It confuses those who think straight. The big lie and monotonously repeated nonsense have more emotional appeal than logic and reason. While the people are still searching for a reasonable counter-argument to the first lie, the totalitarians can assault them with another. Never before in history have such effective means existed to manipulate a society into the psychosis of totalitarianism. Smartphones and social media, television and the internet, all in conjunction with algorithms that quickly censor the flow of unwanted information, allow those in power to easily assault the minds of the masses. What is more, the addictive nature of these technologies means that many people voluntarily subject themselves to the ruling elite's propaganda with a remarkable frequency. Modern technology, explains Mirlu, teaches man to take for granted the world he is looking at. He takes no time to retreat and reflect. Technology lures him on, dropping him into its wheels and movements. No rest, no meditation, no reflection, no conversation. The senses are continually overloaded with stimuli. Man doesn't learn to question his world anymore. The screen offers him answers, ready-made. But
now it's important to note that because of the way these algorithms work, the answers you're going to get are only the ones that the algorithm wants for you. So that's where you end up in situations, for example, like certain YouTubers get shadow banned because they don't want people having that in their algorithm, people telling the truth or making videos like this. They want people in your algorithm that kind of keep you locked in your bubble, and you don't question your world anymore. So you're basically stuck in your bubble. You're not interested in anything that might burst your bubble. And this happens to the right and it happens to the left. And the algorithms are designed to do that. There's a profit motive behind it, because if you're staying on your phone or your computer all the time and you're not taking control of your own experience in those circumstances, then they get more ad revenue. But it's also extremely easy to understand that under the same circumstances, if there was any kind of totalitarian interested force or a fascist force or an authoritative communist force, then these same, systems of control will obviously be extremely valuable to them.
But there is a further step the would-be totalitarian rulers can take to increase the chance of a totalitarian psychosis. And this is to isolate the victims and to disrupt normal social interactions. When alone and lacking normal interactions with friends, family, and coworkers, an individual becomes far more susceptible to delusions for several reasons. Firstly, they lose contact with the corrective force of the positive example, for not everyone is tricked by the machinations of the ruling elite, and the individuals who see through the propaganda can help free others from the menticidal assault. If, however, isolation is enforced, the power of these positive examples greatly diminishes. But another reason that isolation increases the efficacy of menticide is because, like many other species, human beings are more easily conditioned into new patterns of thought and behavior when isolated. Or as Mirlu explains with regards to the physiologist Ivan Pavlov's work on behavioral conditioning, Pavlov made another significant discovery. The conditioned reflex could be developed most easily in a quiet laboratory with a minimum of disturbing stimuli. Every trainer of animals knows this from his own experience. Isolation and the patient repetition of stimuli are required to tame wild animals. The totalitarians have followed this rule. They know that they can condition their political victims most quickly if they are kept in isolation. Alone, confused, and battered by waves of terror, a population under an attack of menticide descends into a hopeless and vulnerable state.
And isolation doesn't necessarily even mean that you're alone. They just make sure that you're only in groups of people that agree with whatever their particular mindset is. And that's how you end up with things like that doctor who did the presentation at Yale saying, don't talk to people who don't agree with you. That's how they say things like, we should deplatform people who say things that we don't agree with. It's to isolate you only into the, the propaganda line that they want you to follow.
The never-ending stream of propaganda turns minds once capable of rational thought into playhouses of irrational forces. And with chaos swirling around them and within them, the masses crave a return to a more ordered world. The would-be totalitarians can now take the decisive step. They can offer a way out and a return to order in a world that seems to be moving rapidly in the opposite direction. But all this comes at a price. The masses must give up their freedom and cede control of all aspects of life to the ruling elite. They must relinquish their capacity to be self-reliant individuals who are responsible for their own lives, and become submissive and obedient subjects. The masses, in other words, must descend into the delusions of the totalitarian psychosis. The totalitarian systems of the 20th century represent a kind of collective psychosis. Whether gradually or suddenly, reason and common human decency are no longer possible in such a system. There is only a pervasive atmosphere of terror and a projection of the enemy, imagined to be in our midst.
So who would that be? Well, that would be the straight white male. And remember what we saw earlier, you need to stop demanding that people use logic and reason and white forms of information. Reason and common human decency are no longer possible. That's also something that Yuri Bezmenov talked about in Ideological Subversion, is that you just get to a point where people can't even reason anymore. And with an ideology that's literally declaring reason and logic to be a part of the enemy, and the enemy in our midst is whiteness and patriarchy and whatever other invisible enemy that they've created that that there's signs of under every rock, just like the inquisitors and witch hunters would find for people. So anyway, let's continue.
Thus society turns on itself, urged on by the ruling authorities. But the order of a totalitarian world is a pathological order. By enforcing a strict conformity and requiring a blind obedience from the citizenry, totalitarianism rids the world of the spontaneity that produces many of life's joys and the creativity that drives society forward. The total control of this form of rule, no matter under what name it is branded, be it rule by scientists and doctors, politicians and bureaucrats, or a dictator, breeds stagnation, destruction, and death on a mass scale. And so perhaps the most important question facing the world is how can totalitarianism be prevented? And if a society has been induced into the early stages of this mass psychosis, can the effects be reversed? While one can never be sure of the prognosis of a collective madness, there are steps that can be taken to help effectuate a cure. This task, however, necessitates many different approaches from many different people. For just as the menticidal attack is multi-pronged, so too must be the counterattack. According to Carl Jung, for those of us who wish to help return sanity to an insane world, the first step is to bring order to our own minds and to live in a way that provides inspiration for others to follow. It is not for nothing that our age cries out for the Redeemer personality, for the one who can emancipate himself from the grip of the collective psychosis and save at least his own soul, who lights a beacon of hope for others, proclaiming that here is at least one man who has succeeded in extricating himself from the fatal identity with the group psyche. But assuming one is living in a manner free of the grip of the psychosis, there are further steps that can be taken. Information that counters the propaganda should be spread as far and as wide as possible, for the truth is more powerful than the fiction and falsities peddled by the would-be totalitarian rulers.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this channel, but that's why I'm going to need your help, because you have to share this kind of information, and you're going to have to do it manually, because the algorithms are not designed to bring the awareness of this situation into common parlance, because it goes against their interests. But we can still use their tools against them.
And so their success is in part contingent on their ability to censor the free flow of information. Another tactic is to use humor and ridicule to delegitimize the ruling elite, or as Mirlu explains, we must learn to treat the demagogue and aspirant dictators in our midst with the weapon of ridicule. The demagogue himself is almost incapable of humor of any sort, and if we treat him with humor, he will begin to collapse.
Ironically, some of the critical race theory workshops are literally named demagoguery. So that's what they're trying to do. But this is also relevant to governments trying to control you as well.
A tactic recommended by Václav Havel, a political dissident under Soviet communist rule, who later became president of Czechoslovakia, is the construction of what are called parallel structures. A parallel structure is any form of organization, business, institution, technology, or creative pursuit that exists physically within a totalitarian society, yet morally outside of it. In communist Czechoslovakia, Havel noted that these parallel structures were more effective at combating totalitarianism than political action. Furthermore, when enough parallel structures are created, a second culture, or parallel society, spontaneously forms and functions as an enclave of freedom and sanity within a totalitarian world.
This is basically talking about forming our own communities, even if they're not in-person communities, just to get together people of like mind and be able to have these kinds of communications that liberate your brain, and find more people and invite them into the group. And that's how you can break the control that these kinds of totalitarians have over your mind, is to associate with people of the like mind to, liberate yourself. We as humans are a communal animal. We're meant to be in groups, but you have to choose what kind of group you're going to be part of. And unfortunately, I think a lot of these people, whether it's the MAGA cult or the social justice cult or Antifa, Black Lives Matter cults, those are all examples of somebody in many cases, just trying to find somewhere to belong. Frequently when you look at pictures of some of the people involved in this stuff, you're thinking, man, I wonder if that person was in any way popular, in school. And mind you, being popular in school is not necessarily a good thing. That's a cult unto itself. But the point is that you're thinking, you notice that some of the people who gravitate to these kinds of movements are people who really wouldn't belong anywhere else. And that, because they joined in hating whatever the enemy is, then, they were accepted in these other groups. But we should be able to form groups of our own, communities essentially of people who are of the like mind of trying to free yourself, to think for yourself, and to free others and allow them to think for themselves.
Or as Havel explains in his book, The Power of the Powerless, what else are parallel structures than an area where a different life can be lived? A life that is in harmony with its own aims, and which in turn structures itself in harmony with those aims. What else are those initial attempts at social self-organization than the efforts of a certain part of society to rid itself of the self-sustaining aspects of totalitarianism, and thus, to extricate itself radically from its involvement in the totalitarian system? But above all else, what is required to prevent a full descent into the madness of totalitarianism is action by as many people as possible. For just as the ruling elite do not sit around passively, but instead take deliberate steps to increase their power, So too, an active and concerted effort must be made to move the world back in the direction of freedom. This can be an immense challenge in a world falling prey to the delusions of totalitarianism, but as Thomas Paine noted, tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph.
So that's that. I have not done a stream like this, so I'm hoping that I did everything right. But anyway, let me take a look here at this. So anyway, I'm gonna try to pull up an image so that I can take a better look and see if like you guys are in the chat and all that. Thank you for your patience with me as I figure this out, because it's been a while. Oh boy. Okay. So anyway, I hope you guys liked that, and I hope that it helped you to kind of have some insight in what I'm talking about. You know, you have to think about whether or not you're actually under the effects of a mass psychosis. And being aware of it really is like a major part of the battle. You know, that's what puts you in a situation, you know, where you can choose to not allow it to control you. You know, that's really the issue. So, this is taking forever. Normally I'll have this already set up. But, okay. So anyway. Why is it not? Oh, okay, fine, whatever. Oops. Okay. So, here we go. Yep. Yay, people in the chat. Anyway, so I hope you guys liked that. And anybody who's in here late, it's fine. You know, it'll all be uploaded. But just let me know what you guys thought of that. And if you have anything to say, let me take a look at what's in here. I guess there was only a few people who commented. I don't like, part of the problem with, I think, with my viewers is like they're all like in different time zones. So inevitably that means that people are going to be on here at different times, which is why I don't normally do things like streams. But, you know, anyway. Also, don't forget to visit V-Radio US to get into my different social media so that you're getting the notifications. I was trying to figure out how to put this notification together, and it was not working. So, but that was what I was hoping for. I'm playing around with this now because I've never messed with this before. Yay! Okay. So what are people saying? There were definite problems that need addressing: poverty, reforms to the prison system, but there are symptoms. Western society is being ended by authoritarianism. Yeah, well, authoritarianism is often, like they were saying in the video, something that is offered to you as the solution. You know, if you just go along with me, everything will be safe. You think back to the Emperor in Star Wars. You know, what was he suggesting? You know, by the end of it, he's like, well, you know, if you guys just go along with me, give me all the control, you know, then you'll be good. Just do that, you know. Oh, cool. Hello, Adam. Twitter is the best way to contact me. Okay. I would absolutely love to come on your stream. That would be fantastic. In fact, if you were still listening, Adam, I will tweet you, like probably now. And thank you, Colin. I'm getting better. What's going on with me is I am in physical therapy, and so I can kind of move, but it's not great. So we will see what comes of that. Fortunately enough, I did talk to my previous employer, and they said they're okay with me doing my job while sitting. You know, so if it comes down to that, that's probably what I'm going to have to do. Let me take a look back here. It says, Twitter's the best way to contact me if you want to come on one of my Thursday streams. Okay, so I'm looking for you on Twitter, Adam. Let me take a look. Adam friended. Nope, not finding it. I'll have to see where he is. In the grand scale, this is just the ebb and flow of the universe. The trick is staying ahead of the wave. I don't disagree. Let me see here. If I go... I think I found him. Yep, yay, I found him. There. Sorry about that brief moment, guys. I just I went ahead and messaged Adam because I'd like to go on his show and then hopefully be able to expand upon my audience. So anyway, I don't know how many of you guys were actually watching through the whole thing, but I'm gonna make that video available. It's not my work, but it definitely works, I would say, for what it is that I've been trying to accomplish with the Do You Think for Yourself series. You have to be aware of these sociological forces. You have to be aware of the effect that it has on you and can make it difficult for you to actually think. And you don't realize that these forces are controlling you, until it's too late, basically. It's a situation of you're like, man, why did I agree with that? We saw that, for example, with the Nazis. A lot of the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials were just like, well, I was just doing what I was told. They don't understand that what they were doing was wrong because group forces and energies played on them and manipulated them into thinking that that was okay. Everybody else was doing it, right? So anyway, so Cello Cover says, to what extent is authoritarianism a problem in the West? I don't think that it is a huge problem, but we are currently dismantling a lot of the things that were put in place to protect us from it. There's a lot of elements in the Constitution that were designed specifically for that reason. They were designed to protect us from authoritarian systems coming to pass. That's actually one of the reasons why change is so slow in our government, why we have so many checks and balances, is the Constitution was designed to be sure that just one crazy person, couldn't just take control of everything. So, there's a cost with that, as it means that changes are slow, but at the same time, when we start to talk about things like being comfortable with censorship, for example, you're asking for totalitarianism to just come in and take over. If you create a huge crisis, then you're asking for totalitarianism to come in and provide the solution. Like I've said in a lot of my previous streams and videos, one of the big problems we have is that, all of the rioting and the chaos and the violence is creating a circumstance that will make people more and more comfortable with the idea of, draconian measures taken by the government. That's really the real problem, is that the more of this insanity that we do, supposedly in the name of activism, the more we're making people comfortable with the idea that the government might harshly act on our behalf to take these people down. Just think about, for example, the way that the people react to the videos about Antifa. When the police, for example, finally cracked down on Antifa, there were people who probably normally would not be okay with the police being harsh, thinking to themselves, man, I'm glad those guys are finally getting their heads cracked. It's the same thing, if you're concerned about, any kind of basically, if you're concerned about any kind of authoritarian nonsense taking control, then doing things to make people afraid of you is probably the worst, the worst solution. Sowing chaos, if you're concerned about fascism, so your goal is to just start burning down and destroying people's property, that's a great way to, bring about fascism. Because when somebody comes around and says, I got the solution for that, just follow me, those people are going to do what they said in the video that we just watched, which is they're going to be like, oh yeah, sure, anything to end this chaos is what's going to happen. So anyway, let me take a look here also at the chat. Ought to be consumed. By using groupthink and emotional appeals, you can get a large population to go along with illogical things that they don't benefit them. I agree wholeheartedly, and that's one of the reasons why I do my best to try to dismantle groupthink. Is that's how you get people to go along with like more and more radical ideas. I'm always kind of blasting on the woke types, but they're probably one of the best examples of just getting people to accept increasingly crazier stuff. And the same thing is true of the people who are really deep in the MAGA cult. Like that's something I remember is like, if you talked bad about Trump, people are immune, and I mean, to be fair, enough people lie about Trump that it's kind of hard to tell the truth about Trump, because at that point they're so desensitized to it because they've heard enough nonsense about it, but you can get people to agree to, oh, okay, so, Trump did this, Trump did that, and they just don't care anymore. They're willing to accept anything he says. The problem is that, opposing that and just being the opposite of that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to end up falling into an authoritarianism in the other direction. For all the people complaining about the Trumpers and the right, they're not trying to shut down peaceful protests somewhere else. They respect the ideas of freedom of expression and freedom of speech. And if you can't do that, if your ideology is based entirely on being able to shut people up and prevent them, from talking, and that's the only way you can get people to agree with you is by making a situation where nobody who doesn't agree with you has a chance to speak, then your ideology is probably not very strong. So let me see here. We got the people seeking or cementing power use the foolish to increase their own gains. This is the mechanism meant to indoctrinate masses into foregoing their rights. Absolutely. That is what for example, the Bolsheviks, in communist Russia would have called the useful idiots. For Hitler, it would have been the brown shirts. Frequently those people are not even necessarily very bright, but they serve a purpose. So, but anyway, guys, this was kind of a test, so it is relevant to things I was talking about earlier. I'm actually going to be putting together a structured video right now after I go ahead and end this stream. So I just wanted to see how this worked out and if I could get it to work the way I wanted. There are definitely some things I'd like to fix. Like I'd like to be able to, for example, watch the chat while I'm, streaming this stuff. But remember that, I was primarily a podcaster, so I'm still playing around with things like streaming and video editing. So thanks again for tuning in. And again, don't forget to visit v-radio.us. That's where I've got all of my stream stuff as far as like my social media. And that way you can be sure that you actually get notifications. I got more reports when I finally just went through and manually shared the link to that video to a lot of my previous viewers, and they're like, "Man, I thought you were done. It's been so long since I saw one of your videos, and I've been making stuff this whole time." So, you don't have to participate on those social media platforms if you don't want to, but I'm going to post links to every single project I do on that website. So it's actually not going to be on the website per se. It's going to be, whether it's on my Discord, my Telegram, my Facebook group, whichever one you prefer. Everything's going on all of them. So I'm going to get to work on my next video, which is going to be discussing this really fun conversation where Bill Maher, who I don't always agree with, but he's a left-leaning guy who does a show on HBO. He had on Ben Shapiro and another fellow whose name is escaping me, black gentleman, and they were arguing about critical race theory. And I'm going to go over all the different fallacies that I've noticed, because there's kind of a pattern, I would say, to how the critical race theory thing is going, and that's what I'm going to put in this video to try to help you understand it. But it's not just relevant to arguing about critical race theory. We really need to study how these weird debates work because debate tactics work because we need to be able to identify them in all topics, and that's true of people on the right or the left. Really, at this point, no matter what side of the aisle you think you're on, it's really important that people become aware of the logical fallacies and how they convince people, to ignore pertinent information presented by people with, perhaps from the side that would be benefiting you. If you've been indoctrinated to think, well, I'm only going to listen to stuff that sounds lefty, or I'm only going to listen to stuff that sounds righty, then you get stuck in what I call the unnatural mode of thinking that people are locked in. When you're told that you have to either be a Republican or a Democrat, that there is nothing else. That's really, if you go back to watch the Independence Manifesto, I kind of go into why, I feel that that's just unhealthy, unnatural, and it creates these circumstances where people feel like through groupthink that they have to accept concepts that they wouldn't otherwise accept. I've never been, one for that. I don't fall into that. That's why I usually point out the most obvious would be I'm pro-gun rights, but I'm also pro-welfare. Where does somebody like that exist in the political spectrum? Well, right now they don't. There's no place for people like that. And when Bernie Sanders started out back in 2016, he was actually pro-gun rights because you have to be. I mean, you're not going to get elected in Vermont if you're talking about taking people's guns. But he didn't really have anywhere else to be. Like, where would he go? Because just about everything else, most of what he was thinking, well, it's not great for most of the mainstream Democrats. It doesn't change the fact that it was closer to Democrat than it was to Republican. So, looking here, interesting because Ben Shapiro and Bill Maher would be critical of CRT, but of course their analysis and criticism can be bad on left and the right. Well, yeah, absolutely. But the thing is that the stuff that Ben Shapiro is talking about is all legit. And that's why I tell people all the time, like, my kids, for example, I tell them, I'm like, I don't agree with Ben Shapiro on a lot of things because I'm not a conservative. As far as like things that he says that are, in regards to economics, I don't agree with that at all. Like when he made comments like, well, people can just sell their property and that's how they'll deal with it if global warming like starts to destroy their property. Yeah, because everybody's going to buy, property that's underwater, right? There were lots of other things that I'll get into at another time, but he also says things that are point blank true. And that's one of the big problems that's going on right now is that people who are right or left, the truth about how we need to solve poverty is actually a combination of what the left would tell you and what the right would tell you. It's not going to be enough, for example, to just throw money, it's not going to be enough to just throw money at people in poverty in the ghetto. Reparations, even for people of color, it's not going to be enough. If you want to fix the situation, then a certain degree of what the right would say is also true, which means personal responsibility, doing things to try to improve your situation to get out of poverty, and just throwing money at you is not going to guarantee that. I was watching a panel that was put together by Brett Weinstein where he gathered a group of black intellectuals. And one of the things that they pointed out was like, they used an example of that statistically, people who win the lottery are often poor again within about 4 years. Because if you are still stuck in the mindset of what, of your relationship with money from being poor, frequently you find it difficult to break out of that mold. And then you just kind of waste money on things. You don't have I guess I would say a good relationship with your money. Then it's gone, and then you're back to where you were. So, it's not going to be enough to just throw money at the problem that's going on in those schools, in those communities. You're going to have to actually, really take an honest look at the culture. And that's a look that people are not prepared to take. They're not prepared to actually critically look, at what needs to change. And I've talked about that a lot on my, my podcasts and such. So, but I agree also, I don't mispronounce your name, Schrodinger's cat, left and right and center. These are terms of control. I absolutely agree with that. I think that's, it's all about putting us in little boxes and boxes where we are basically in opposition of one another. That's all by design to put us in a situation where we're fighting each other, and it's also about, when you think about it, if we're fighting each other over those things, like if you watch my, Independence Manifesto, I put together kind of a list of like parodies of the political parties. So they have all these things that they supposedly oppose each other on, like pro-life, and stuff like that. The police issues, those are all things they want to distract us with. Well, at the end of the day, Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell are all basically being fed by the same people. They're all owned by the same corporations anyway. The rest of that stuff is just like distractions. It's just in a situation to keep us thinking, well, I'd better vote for this team because there's these elements like, let's say, abortion that I agree with them on. But at the end of the day, both parties are pro-war, both parties are pro-corporations, both parties are, basically set in that situation where they don't really care about us. So, the people who are funding them are who they care about. So anyway, like I said, guys, thank you for tuning in. I tried to share this stream with everybody. I'm still kind of learning how that works. Hope it seems like a bunch of you came up, so I'm hoping that this got out to everybody. And I know it'll still be on my channel. So, John Smith says, aside from the crazies on Twitter, I find usually agree with the average Joe, or at least can come to an understanding. It's the leaders that cause problems. Yeah, the thing is like there seems to be an effort to try to prevent us from being able to do that. Having civil discourse about politics is becoming harder and harder. One of the things that, the people who are on the right that, follow my show because of stuff I did, like say about Kyle Rittenhouse, maybe they're people who came to my show because of Lynn Wood, those people who still follow me, they say that, it's like, I don't agree with you about a lot of things, but you don't just try to beat me over the head with your ideals, and I'm like, well, yeah, that's because I'm trying to have like a real conversation with you, and that's going to mean that I have to be willing to accept that you're not going to agree with everything I say, and anybody who demands that you do that is not trying to help you think for yourself. They're trying to help you think like them. Now, I have done some videos to try to explain to you guys what my views are, but I think part of it is that, there was also kind of a negative, incorrect belief that, for example, supporters of Bernie Sanders are communists, even though I end up spending a lot of time arguing with communists because I'm not a communist, and that my brand of leftism is like Denmark or Finland or Norway. It's not like Venezuela or Soviet Russia or Cuba, and that there is a major difference. And that was an understanding that I think I needed to reach with you guys. You don't have to agree with me, that's fine. But it was important to kind of identify that I'm not your enemy. If you don't want to become leftist, that's fine. I don't care about that. What I care about is, do you think for your damn self? Are you making your own decisions? Have you been genuinely and sincerely informed? Because one comment that I've been making all the way back since 2008, although the words that I use for it have kind of changed, is at the end of the day, the MAGA hat wearing types and the Antifa types are all going to be sitting in the same concentration camps. Period. The sooner we recognize that, the better. So thanks again for tuning in, guys. I am going to be working on another video. Hopefully it'll be done tonight. And thanks for tuning into V Radio.